Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Admit One podcast, where we talk to students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. We'll be reflecting on the student's profile, which will include a discussion around their academic record, extracurricular activities, and application strategies. Today's guest is Soham, who is a freshman or just completed his freshman year at Vanderbilt University. He's a double major in medicine, health, and society, and English with a minor in data science. Soham, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about your pursuit of college and kind of what landed you at Vanderbilt, and then learn a little bit more about kind of what's been going on since you've gotten there.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to give some wisdom, I guess. I don't really know.
Perfect. So let's kind of like give some context and background. Can you give a little bit of insight or perspective into, from a high school standpoint, like tell me a little bit about your high school, to a little bit about your curriculum. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I went to a regular Midwestern public school. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, from the suburbs. So my high school was pretty big. My graduating class was around 700, 750. But it wasn't like an incredibly competitive school. Like, we had a ton of kids that were getting into pretty good schools. Like, one of my friends goes to MIT and Penn. You know, we have like a lot of kids going to Ivies. But it was a very collaborative environment. We kind of offered all of the APs. It wasn't like there was anything that wasn't really given to us when it came to classes. But it was a public school. Not everything was really handed to us. Most of my extracurriculars came from me finding opportunities elsewhere. I was really involved in my school regardless, though. I was the president of my NHS chapter my senior year. Did a lot of stuff within the school, like volunteering, working with teachers, just doing whatever I can. I was on some advisory councils for the district as well. So yeah, but it was kind of just a regular high school. There was nothing really crazy about it, and I enjoyed my time. Yeah.
Cool. Talk to me a little bit about what your curriculum looked like. Yeah. You said, obviously, there are APs, but not necessarily like everything's kind of driven for you. So walk me through, like, how did you design your curriculum? What were you thinking about? Was that something that you were even like really aware of when you are a freshman, sophomore? Yeah. Like, what did that progression look like?
So going into high school, I kind of knew that I was going to be taking a lot more of the advanced classes. We had regular classes, so when we were freshmen and sophomores, we weren't really taking any AP classes. We had honors classes and regular classes. So I was taking a lot of the honors classes. And then my sophomore year, that was when I started taking a couple of APs. I took AP Chem my sophomore year, along with like AP Physics 1 and AB. It was a pretty tough schedule. And then going into my junior and senior year, that was when I was primarily taking a ton of APs. Like, my school didn't really restrict the amount you could take. So there were some kids that were taking 7 APs out of the 7 class spots that they had. I think the most I took was maybe 5. It was a tough schedule. But like, that's kind of what I felt I had to do to be competitive. And the APs I was taking, it wasn't necessarily like I was just really interested in it or anything like that. It was just because it was offered, and like, to get that weighted GPA to show that you're taking a really hard and rigorous schedule for colleges, like, it was just kind of like a necessary thing. So yeah.
Were there, because I see sometimes kids will be like, oh, I'm not going to take AP Physics, but I'm going to take AP Environmental Science, which I'm not knocking environmental science or AP Environmental Science as a course, but like, from a rigor standpoint, I would certainly look at, as an admission person, AP Physics as a more rigorous curriculum. Yeah. And I always kind of think it's funny, like, are you trying to you think you're tricking somebody? Like, was that sort of part of it? It's like, I'm just going to take this because it has an AP designation to it.
Yeah. I know a lot of my friends did that. I personally didn't really try to do that. Like, I didn't take APUSH. I didn't take APES. I didn't go on and take like advanced physics or anything because I didn't really have an interest in it. I think towards the end when I was a senior and I was deciding what I wanted to take. I wanted to take classes that I was actually interested in, just because I knew that like my grade was important to me, obviously, but I knew that if I was going to be interested in the material, I would have more of a desire to go to class and like to pay attention and everything like that. And at the end of the day, it would if I wanted to write an essay on it or something, and if I actually had like a personal like attachment to this class, it would make it so much easier to do. So I have something to talk about. Um,
Totally.
but yeah, I know a lot of kids do that, and I mean, if you want to go through a class and give yourself more work, go ahead. But I don't really think it's like really useful if you're not going to get anything out of it. So that was
Yeah.
my ideology when it came to all of this.
Yeah, I always get a kick out of like chasing APs. Like
Yeah,
I get the idea of obviously we want to have intensify your curriculum and have a rigorous program and all of those kinds of things. But like the idea of chasing APs to me is always sort of it just doesn't make a ton of sense.
yeah,
If you can build off of things, then that makes a lot of sense. And if you can take more advanced courses in your particular area of study, then sure, I'm totally on board. Or if you can even go outside of the context of your high school and take courses like, if your high school ends with AP Calc BC and you go to a community college and you take multivariable or something like that, like
yeah,
it makes a ton of sense. But to take courses that don't necessarily align with any of your interests and you're just taking them because of the designation, that doesn't necessarily always connect with me. I'm curious from your perspective. So you're a health major, pre-med track, also an English major,
yeah.
right? So, which is awesome, super cool. Is that something that you knew you were going to go into in high school? Like, what did you always like
Yeah.
English? Were you also interested in something? Like, how does that kind of play out?
Yeah, so I've always really enjoyed writing and reading. And in high school, I loved my AP Lang and AP Lit classes. I did super well on them, but that was also like it was I did well on them because I just loved the material. I thought it was really engaging and interesting. And going into college, I didn't actually see myself going in as an English major or double major. I initially started out as uh, the MHS, so that's like the Vanderbilt's public health major, and then a econ double major, and then I took an econ class and realized I absolutely despised econ. It wasn't for me. Um, so I took an English class this last semester, and it was this like Middle Eastern focused Arabian Nights, and included a lot of notes about Orientalism. And um, I loved the class. I loved writing. I loved reading all the books and everything like that. And I think I just kind of realized that I'm going to be doing a lot of health related and science related classes, and that's what most of my extracurriculars are going to be. Since I'm trying to go into med school, I might as well do something else that I'm going to find like interesting that's outside of that STEM realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just me just trying to make sure that I'm staying just engaged in the material I'm learning, and I'm not getting burnt out by just taking a ton of like STEM classes.
Yep.
So it was also just kind of like a decision I made on the whim. I was like, I want to read more books. I want to write more. It's what I find a lot of pleasure from that. So might as well do
I wish I heard more high school students say that. I want to read more.
it.
I love that. So tell me a little bit about, from an academic standpoint, are you pretty consistent with your grades? Are you a little bit up and down? Or is it like primarily A's, a mixed bag? Like what are some of the trends that you have? And is there a course maybe that you struggle with or anything like that?
Are we talking about in high school or
In high
college?
school.
Oh, in
Yeah.
high
High school.
school.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I was an A kid. I had a 4.0
Mhm.
throughout high school, and my weighted GPA was pretty high. Um it wasn't like consistent all the time. It was I my dad would always be super upset with me because throughout the year, throughout the semester, I would start out really, really badly. Like I would start out with a bad test grade or something like that. This assignment would bring me down, and then towards the end, towards finals, I would always bring it back up and he would always be like, Soham, you stress me out too much. So yeah, it was definitely an upwards trajectory throughout the semester. I think the classes that kind of gave me the hardest time were the STEM classes, just because they were just the most rigorous classes. I took AP Chem as a sophomore. I do not recommend anyone do that. Definitely the most like try hard thing I did in high school, but that was by far the hardest class I took in high school. Yep. That and Calc BC.
Do you think it was because of the timing of when you took it? Like if you took it later, do you think you'd been better?
I think there were two things. First, the class itself is just incredibly difficult, and my teacher in specific really tried to emphasize learning the material over memorizing it, which I think every teacher should do. But he did that by making tests really, really difficult and really long and giving us less time to take it. So like you weren't second guessing anything. You weren't trying to pull anything out of your brain that like you memorized. You had to like go with your gut instinct, and that made the class super difficult. And I don't think as a sophomore I had the study habits that would make the class easier for me. So it was definitely more of a grind than it should have been. But it taught me a lesson really early on into my high school career that was super valuable. So yeah, I think I just studied a ton, and that's what allowed me to have such a high GPA and be pretty successful in my rigorous schedule.
Yeah. Not to harp on the AP stuff, but I do think that it's also an important thing for students and families to think about, because when you chase APs, sometimes you don't necessarily see the larger picture, especially when you're taking them like earlier on in high school. Like, what's the end goal? At the end of the day, what really matters is like, what are the courses that you've taken by the time you've graduated and when, as a senior. And so if you're taking an AP, and I'll have kids sometimes will be like, I'm going to take this AP in the summer. You're going to take an AP class in the summer, like a full year course over the course of like 6 to 8 weeks. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But if it doesn't move the needle, then it doesn't necessarily matter. Like if you take Calc AB in the summer going into your senior year, so you can take Calc BC, like you could just take Calc BC. So
exactly.
It ends up, it really, the structure should be more thoughtful of what are the advantages that you have and how do you build off of those advantages.
I've been like, my sister is going into her senior year this year, and so she's going through this whole application process and everything like that. And while she's throughout her high school experience, I've been advising her on what to take for schedule and everything. And I think the one thing that I told her is that having more APs doesn't really do anything. Like, it shows that you've taken a ton of classes, you're capable of having a hard schedule. Sure, that'll get you brownie points. But if you don't have anything that comes out of the experience that's like valuable, and like it's changed the way you think about school, or like you've learned a lot of valuable knowledge from the class, then there's really no point. I don't think colleges are going to care that you took a lot of APs because they know that you can do it. But now that I'm in college, there's really no use of having a 5 on your AP exam other than, oh, I don't need to take this intro class for my major. But I'm a STEM major. I don't really care that I have my econ credits now because I'm not going to be taking any econ classes. So now what I'm telling her, she's considering going into pre-law. She doesn't need to take AP Chem, AP Bio. I mean, like, those are the only classes that she may have left in her STEM classes, or the STEM AP classes. But that doesn't really give anything to her and doesn't add anything to her like profile. So then why take those classes? I don't think there's any. You don't need to be headhunting AP classes.
Yeah, I think the key is with anything, and we're going to talk about kind of extracurriculars in a minute, and this will be actually a good lead in, but the key is the depth at which you do something, not necessarily the breadth. So like checking boxes and saying, I did 12 APs and the guy next to me did 10. Okay, well, fine, but it's still a lot of APs. Like, you're taking a ton of APs. So I care more about how you've engaged with the subjects that you're interested in and what you've done. And and especially at a school where APs are not restricted, right? Like I'm counting when I'm looking at APs, when I review an application, I want to see what the rigor of the curriculum is. But if you're taking 8, 9, 10 APs, like what's the difference between that and 12 APs?
Right.
Honestly, not that much. You're taking an extremely rigorous curriculum. And I really want to see beyond that, like how have you utilized those experiences and how have you built on them outside of the context of your high school? What are the things that you've done with that? So that actually leads into extracurriculars. So talk to me a little bit about that from your standpoint. Like what are some of the things that you're involved with within high school? And how do you kind of develop those interests?
Yeah. So, I spent a lot of time volunteering. I think that was the main cornerstone of my extracurriculars and my applications. I became super, super involved in this one organization called KEEN. Stands for Kids Enjoy Exercise Now. This is a nationwide organization that works to uplift children and families that are affected by cognitive and physical disabilities. So every Sunday I would go to one of our local high schools and spend a bunch of time with a lot of our athletes, just playing basketball, running around, chasing them when they were riding on bikes. It was a really fun activity for me. I got to, spend some time working, like just running around, having fun, but it was super valuable and fulfilling, just to be able to spend some time doing something that I knew was good. So yeah, I spent all 4 years of high school volunteering, practically every weekend, and I'm still doing that now in college. I also spent a lot of time doing research. So one of my, I had this one unique opportunity, offered through my school district, called Authentic Scientific Research. So this was a class offered at my high school through which the district gave funds to high school students to do basic research. So I got to work with a lot of like bacteria and do a bunch of procedures and kind of make my own project and have my own like presentation and everything. So and I was able to do my own poster presentation. So that was a super valuable experience that I was able to use to get research internships as a high school student. So I'm lucky to have WashU literally 20 minutes away from my house. So the summers of my junior and senior year, I would drive to the WashU School of Medicine and do research with 2 PIs. So my first summer, I did work on just like this cell organelle, like this that was like involved in diabetes. So that was really interesting. And then my second summer, I did some cancer research. So those were like the 2 main things I did just throughout high school. And then I had a bunch of leadership positions. During COVID, I was super involved in a student-led climate change organization. So I worked to organize a bunch of cleanups around the St. Louis area, river cleanups, stream cleanups, park cleanups. And since it was quarantine, we were all like socially distancing. So that was how I tried to do work during quarantine. And then I was my NHS chapter president my senior year.
So I've got 2 things. We'll definitely talk about Keen because that's part of your application that we'll discuss. But I want to talk a little bit about the research stuff, because research is becoming more and more important, expected in some ways for a lot of these schools. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like the University of Pennsylvania, for example, last year they came out with they boasted about a third of their students who applied early decision had conducted research through high school. Now, I mean, I work with kids all the time. Like I get that a lot of kids do research. It seems wild to me that a third of students are doing research. I literally worked at a grocery store in high school, and like that was that was worked. But I also think that part of like what the struggle with research is sometimes is wanting to get into labs. And I think for a long time I would have students who would like cold email professors hoping to get into labs and that kind of thing. But they don't have any, there's nothing that they've done. And so it's hard to get into the lab. So for you, I think that first step is obviously probably a pretty significant one of the program that you have within your school district, to be able to have that research experience, which then you can leverage and say, look, I've already done these things to some degree. Now can I come work with you? So can you talk a little bit about, so you do the research within your school district, and then how do you actually get into the lab?
Yeah. So it was all about effectively communicating what I did. And what I did through my high school wasn't a lot. It wasn't, I wasn't doing crazy research that was going to change the field like I know a ton of kids are able to do. But it just showed that I had interest in doing science research. I think one of the main things that I learned from speaking with my PIs over the last couple of years is that they aren't necessarily looking for kids that are going to be, these geniuses that are able to change the way we think about like cell biology and, all these different things. They're looking for kids that are going to be doing this throughout their career or throughout their college experience. PIs don't necessarily want to just be a stepping stone. They don't want, a kid to come in and just be like, I'm doing research so I can get into college, or I'm doing research just so I can get into med school. They're looking for students that are going to take an interest in what they're doing and potentially incorporate it into their career. In high school and even now, I'm interested in going and doing an MSTP program. So these are becoming a physician scientist. So in med school, I would be both pursuing my MD and my PhD. When I told these PIs when I was in high school that I was interested in doing this sort of thing, they were like, wow, yeah, of course, we want to be involved in your experience, because they know that I'm taking a personal interest in what they're doing, and that's going to lead to something down the line. So I having high school experience with research, especially the way I had it, is really hard to have. It's a very unique experience that I had with ASR in my district, but you don't necessarily need to have that, from what I understand. I think just communicating your a student's interest in just doing research and just learning about how it's done is usually enough to get PIs interested. And you're going to come across issues with, they're not going to have enough space, or they don't usually take high school students. I emailed maybe 50 to 60 PIs when I was in high school every week, and I would only get maybe 5 emails back, and most of them were saying, we don't have space, or we don't take high school students. It's just more about being persistent and, trying to show that you have that interest.
Yeah, I think the two things that you hit on are the demonstration of an interest in it, and also having a foundation. So I've done research to some degree already. Yeah. I'm not a complete novice. I'm coming into this with some sort of background in it, but then also being able to show the initiative and the drive. And I think that the other thing too is from a college standpoint, when reviewing an application, because I get questions all the time about okay, I'm doing research. Does it need to get published, right? The idea of publication, and publication is fine. It's a nice little accolade. Especially there's a lot of different high school journals out there that are perfectly fine and legitimate. But as an admission person, I'm not going to read your article on cell biology. That's not something that I have any interest or expertise on, and there's not a professor who's sitting down reading your work. But what I do understand is how a student has demonstrated the ability to pursue something in a way that is different from what his peers have done. And I think for you, that kind of that's illustrated within your application, where you talk about, you say, okay, well, I did the research here, then I reached out to these people, then I was able to work with these PIs. I had experience in X, Y, and Z. So again, it's not about checking the box. Okay, I published something, check. that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a narrative and to be able to frame that narrative as well, which I think is critical. So let's shift a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit about Keen, which you had mentioned earlier, and that's we're going to look at your personal statement too. But let's start. This is one of the supplemental essays that you submit to Vanderbilt, which you inevitably attend, and I think you do a couple things really well in this. But so I'm just gonna share my screen and we can talk a little bit about that essay. Here you have 200 to 400 words, where you're going to talk a little bit about your experience at within Keen, and I'll just give you a couple of thoughts, and I want to hear kind of what your approach was after that. So you do a really good job. I think there's an interesting little hook. We get interest in the from the reader. You also have up to 400 words, which is a nice section of space, whereas a lot of schools might give you like 150 to 250 words for some of the supplements, and that can be really challenging. But you do a good job of kind of giving context about the organization. But I think that what you do a really, really good job of is taking what I would describe as like obviously a significant part of your profile and your experience. But it's like it's a good program that you've done, and you present it as elite. And I use the word elite all the time, because you talk a lot about like what specifically you did, right? You're talking about it was a large project. It include four high schools, our school district, 6 large sponsors, supported many teachers, administration. We reserved these fields. We ordered and designed shirts. So you're really specific in what the work is that you do, while also being authentic and demonstrating like that this is truly something that you're interested in, invested in. I think that that's a challenge for a lot of high school students when they write, because a lot of the times it either comes across as like paragraph form resume, or there's no detail about why it's an elite component to their profile. It presents more like, oh yeah, we had this program for this organization. And I think you do a good job of kind of tying both of those things in. So I just wonder, like, were you cognizant of that? Was that something that you wanted to make it clear within your application, or how'd you go about kind of approaching it?
Yeah, the way I saw supplemental essays, where it was a way for me to explain something that I had included in my resume, or something that I hadn't included in my resume that I wanted to showcase. And it was a way for me to sort of go about, explaining how I think about things and show the personal, like the importance it had to me as well. So when I was communicating what I thought about, kicking in with Keen and my involvement in Keen, I wanted to show you, obviously, like, oh, this was a very successful endeavor. I was, I was able to talk about how I had leadership positions in both like Keen and NHS and everything like that. But like, that wasn't the main focus of what I was trying to show. It was that I absolutely love this organization. I've spent so much time and just like investment in it. And I was able to do something where I was able to bring two things that I was very involved in together. And it had some positive impact on both groups. And I was able, and what was most important to me was that I was just super happy with the outcome. And I think I really wanted to just show that, rather than say, oh, I'm the NHS president, I am on leadership board for Keen, and, we made this much money. I think the main thing that I was trying to show in this essay was that we spent a lot of time doing it, and I was really happy about how much time we put in and what we got out of it. And I think just describing the whole process was what was going to make that the most obvious when it came to what I was trying to showcase.
Yeah. And I think you do a great job with that. I think there's so often where I work with students where they say like, oh, I'm trying to do it, but I don't have enough words. But the key for me is, especially with those supplementals, is you've got to make sure that like every sentence drives the next one forward. Yeah. Right? Like you only have a short window of time to be able to express what your involvement within something is. So each each sentence has
Yeah.
got to move the story forward. And it's also, and I talk about this in other episodes that we'll do, but it's also keeping in mind that the people who are reading your application have like 8 to 10, 15 minutes when they're reviewing it. So these short answers are really your time to be like, here's my story.
Yeah.
Like, here's one of the big pieces of my puzzle, and you've got to get that all in there. And I think there's too often students kind of float between painting a picture and trying, they read things on Reddit, and it could be like some 45-year-old man who posted an essay and said they got into Harvard or something. But they're reading things that they think an admission officer wants to write, whereas I think to me, or wants to read, to me, this is a better representation of like, this is something I'm really proud of, and here's what I did to complete it, which I think is great. I also want to talk a little bit about your personal statement as well. So I'll bring that up, and we can talk a little bit about kind of what your approach is. So was the personal statement the first essay that you wrote?
I wrote it maybe July.
Would you call this an easy essay for you to write, or was it like a challenge to figure out what the topic was, what the focal point was?
It was definitely more of a challenge to figure out what I wanted to write about. When I figured out what I wanted to write about, it kind of became a very easy thing, because I would just think about how it all just started with the intro. I was thinking about how I wanted it, bring up my topic. I was just thinking about it when I was on a run, and it kind of just all came to me. And then, once I started writing, it all kind of just flowed. So it was definitely really, really hard to come up with the topic and then make it interesting. But then I think once I had a good grasp of how I wanted to start the essay, it all kind of just came together.
Yeah, I think that the starting point for students is sometimes backwards, right? Like they usually, most people will start with what the main essay is, and that can feel, I would imagine, like very daunting, right? I've got 650 words to essentially like tell my story, or that's how I think it sometimes presents itself. The reality is most of these schools are going to ask for supplemental essays anyway, so you have other ways to tell different parts of your story. So actually, like, a recommendation I always give to students is don't write one essay, write like 3 or 4 essays in not, you don't have to write 600 words, but like 300 words about 3 or 4 different pieces of your puzzle. What are the things that you've done that you're proud of? And then look at those and see like which one feels most authentic for a main essay, and how do I want to present it? I think you do a great job with this. We'll pull it up. With being really open, honest, vulnerable, talking about kind of what your perception of yourself is, what maybe the perception of others is. So talk to me a little bit about the writing process for this, and kind of be, vulnerability is a big part of it, right? So had you written anything like this before in high school? Like what was kind of your mindset?
No, this is probably the first like actual very personal thing I wrote in high school, but I thought it was a good way to, I guess, just learn a little bit more about myself as well. I think while writing this, I was able to sort of just think about my experience being an Indian American, and I think I learned a lot. It was really nice to reflect on my journey. I was 18 at the time, and I was really happy with the way I came into myself, and how confident I had become with my identity as a senior. So it was really fun to write. I think my thought process when it came to writing these essays was that I was going to be writing a ton of essays. It was going to take a lot of my time. I might as well not see it as a chore and just see it as something that might be fun. I think a lot of my supplemental essays, a lot of my main essay as well, my Common App, it's not like the most serious thing in the world. There's a lot of jokes. I like to think it's witty. It was lighthearted, and that's how I am as a person. I think I wanted to show that, like, I wanted to put a little bit of myself into each essay, and I think I did that pretty well, especially with this Common App essay.
Yeah, and you have a couple. I love when there are themes, because again, when you've from a reader's perspective, when you're reading dozens of essays in a day, when you have a theme that comes up like the ABCD and the stuff with shaving and all of those kinds of things that start at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, and then as a reader you kind of get invested into what the author is saying, and then they come back at the end, it's like, oh, that's a nice little bow that you've put on it, and it feels complete and it feels wrapped up. And I think you do a really good job with the utilization of those themes and being honest and sincere. And I think it also gives another side of your application, right? So you've got this research that you've been pretty heavily invested with. You talk about the Keen stuff, but then you also have this kind of
Mm-hmm.
self-reflection, and being able to evaluate who you are as an individual and kind of what your
Yeah.
place is in an identity and things like that. And so, did you, when you shared, did you share this like with your parents? Like, what was their reaction to it?
um, they were really happy with it. I think they really liked the way I wrote it. They played a huge role in actually in the process of writing this as well. Like I asked them about the proverb that I used. And I asked them to translate it for me. I mean, they played a pretty big role in the story itself. You know, I stole my dad's razor. Like, I think they understood what I was trying to say. And I think one thing that, you know, my dad had a reservation about it. He was like, maybe, you know, you should write something about like on your resume or talk about some sort of like academic interest you have. And I think, you know, looking back, you know, maybe that would have been interesting to do as well. You know, go into more detail about something that I had done research on. Or, but I think with this essay, I was trying to stay away from just restating my resume or restating like a supplemental essay or restating like a bullet point on my resume. I think I wanted to give something that it was a personal essay, so I wanted to make it personal and I wanted to show my personality traits. And I think I gave like I think this topic of the essay with, you know, being confused about your identity is it's a commonly written thing, but the thing that I was trying to do was I was trying to make it interesting and make it unique. I don't think very many people are going to be talking about themselves being an ABCD through the lens of their first experience shaving. So
Mm-hmm.
I that was my goal with this essay, and I think I did a pretty good job with it.
I think you do a great job. I also think you make a very good point there, because so often people will say to me, I don't know what to write about. I don't have anything that's unique about me. That like literally makes
Yeah.
no sense. Like, you are uniquely yourself. So you absolutely do. Let's just figure out what it is and talk about how we want to present those things. And I think the presentation is obviously like a critical component to it. And you do a great job with that, especially with those themes. And an example I use all the time is like, look, if you're the whatever, the captain of the soccer team, and you want to write an essay about soccer, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but just keep in mind there are literally
Yeah.
thousands of other people who are also the captain of the soccer team. So you've got to talk about how your involvement, your pursuit of this, or how your perspective has evolved because of soccer is different from what anybody else has done. And I don't think that's impossible. And I think it can be a little bit hard, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think, to your point, like, you know, a lot of people feel like, I don't know my place and my identity feels convoluted or whatever. But when you present
Yeah.
it in a way that other people aren't presenting it, it jumps. And it also feels like, you know, you want the admission person to
Yeah.
like you and to be rooting for you. And I think that this is an easy essay to read and be like, oh, I like this kid. This is funny and like cool. And he's got a good perspective on things. So I think you do a great job with that. So I want to talk a little bit too about application
Hmm.
strategy and like kind of how you approached that. So you're a consistent A student with ton of advanced placement courses. You've done research. You're a very good writer. Like, what's your approach as you start
Hmm.
thinking about schools? And like, you know, did you look at like early
Yeah.
decision stuff? Did you want to wait? What was that kind of thought
Yeah.
process for you?
So I think looking back now, I sort of went about the application process in very naively. Um, I knew that I was going to be competitive. You know, I was my class didn't do class rank, but I knew I was going to be like the top of my class, or like at least
Mm-hmm.
close to it. And I knew I had the the grades. I knew I had the resume to get myself into a top 20 university, which, thank gosh I'm in one right now. I'm really happy about it. But when I went about the application process, I was looking at a ton of universities, and I was looking at a lot of diverse options. I wasn't afraid of thinking about a liberal arts school, like I applied to I applied to Carleton College, I applied to Swarthmore, I applied to I think one or two more, and then I was also applying to pretty big public schools. I applied to UC Berkeley, UCLA, UNC. Like, it was a very, very diverse, like, huge range of schools. And I think now that think about it, and now that I'm in Vandy and I've had my first year there, I kind of wish I didn't. I wish I was a little bit focused in what kind of school I was looking at, because I now know what kind of school works for me. I like the bigger school environment. I like having a lot of kids. I think that like I wouldn't want to know every single person in my grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was thinking about target, safety, reach, definitely a lot more on the reach side, just because I knew that my range could fit that. I had my
Mm-hmm.
safeties. I applied to my state schools. I applied to, private schools that were in my area that I kind of had an idea that I could get into. I had a couple of target schools as well. And I also was applying to BSMD programs. Being pre-med, I was the BSMD programs are like the combined degree ones, where you get your bachelor's and then you're directly admitted into their med school. So I applied. Yeah.
And just for listeners who may not know, like, that's a whole separate application in and of itself. So even just like the logistics of, I heard you mention several schools and then also BSMD programs, the logistics behind doing that, that's a daunting task.
It's a lot of essays. So I think I ended up writing, I think I ended up applying to maybe 5 BSMD programs as well. And one of those programs was an in-state program where maybe like 20% of their class comes from my high school. So I was like, okay, I'm probably going to get into that. So that was another safety program for me. So I ended up applying to a ton of schools, a ton of reaches. And I think now that I'm looking back at it, I wish I hadn't done as many applications. I wish I was a little bit more focused, applied to maybe similar schools, just because now I know what I liked. But back then I didn't. So.
And when you look at like early decision and stuff, did you apply anywhere early decision?
So
or what was
I
the
have
story there?
horrible commitment issues. I was just like, I loved Northwestern. I loved the campus. I really wanted to do medical journalism, and well, Northwestern is like the best school for journalism and is also amazing for pre-med. So that was my dream school going into the application cycle. Was going to do my ED there, got cold feet, decided not to, and then ended up doing my REA to Stanford. So I wasn't able to do any other early action applications other than to public schools, and really restricted what I could do with that early application. And I ultimately now regret it. But it all worked out in the end.
It always works out. I think that one of the things too with early decision, and early decision it's not going away, and it's going to be more impactful over the next couple of years, because students, no offense, Soham, but like you, are applying to a lot of schools, right? And so colleges have a difficulty navigating what enrollment's going to look like. Admission is a hard thing because you have a number that you're supposed to hit, and if you go over that number, you're in trouble. And if you go under that number, you're in trouble. So it's really like you have wiggle room of like 10 students, one way or the other, max. And so as the application numbers increase, that becomes more and more challenging for admission offices to decide, how do we enroll students. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through early decision, where if you apply early decision and you get it in, then you're going to college there. And so they know that you're more likely to matriculate, or that you will matriculate. So you'll see schools now with 50%, 60% of their class coming in through the early decision window. And that's definitely, only going to increase, in my opinion, over the next couple of years, especially at the most selective schools.
Exactly.
So, and I don't, I think for a student like you, like, it's not a problem to necessarily apply restricted early action, like to Stanford. Stanford's obviously it's a shot in the dark for pretty much everybody. It's a reach for everybody. And there's only a handful of schools that are like that. But realistically, you're probably just as competitive as anybody. So I don't have any problem with anybody ever shooting their shot. But the problem with it, to your point, is that you do have the restriction of not being able to apply early decision somewhere. And so when you lose that chip, it puts you in a little bit of a tougher position as you move forward. So, okay. So you apply early action or restricted early action, you apply to some state institutions and things, and then you get to like the ED2 period. Did you do an ED2? Are you going all in on regular decision? What's
so
that?
I was considering doing an ED2 to WashU. It was 20 minutes away from my house. My school has a relatively good track record with getting kids in to WashU through early decision. I have a lot of experience there, did a lot of research there. Ended up not doing any ED2s, ended up just kind of banking on regular decision. Sent in a couple of last minute applications, Vandy being one of them. I applied on the the application deadline day. So yeah, I kind of just went and just took a ton of risks. And I mean, it ended up working out, but I think, like you said, I kind of wish I did the early decision, just because I would have had something and I would have known what I was going to be doing, hopefully. And that's what I'm telling my sister now, do the early decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's a stressful process for sure. But the reality is, like, nobody built you a college. There's nothing specifically for you. And so you've got to be able to think about what makes the most sense for you and for what your interests are. And so, it always ends up working out. And I feel like that's the one thing for students to keep in mind. Like, I totally get the frustration of not maybe getting in, but at the end of the day, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna find a place that you're comfortable with. And then the reality is too, like, where you go to college, is everybody else is excited to be there too. So it's not like, I didn't get into this place, I have to be here. Like, this is a great place and a top institution, and obviously really, really important. So I want to leave with just kind of an update on kind of where you are now and what your next steps are and all of those things. But I think for me, the takeaway from this conversation has been depth over breadth. The depth at which you pursue your academics, right? It doesn't matter necessarily the amount of APs, but more about how you've pursued those and what are your particular areas of interest and how you've explored those things. From an extracurricular standpoint, I don't need you to have 15 different extracurriculars or fill out your extracurricular activity list necessarily. I need you to do a couple of them at an elite level in a way that other people haven't done them. And then even in the college search process, thinking more about the depth at which you understand the school and the programs and what you feel like you're going to be able to be most successful with and take out of that. To me, those are the things that put you in the best position possible. And I think being able to reflect on this, it's super insightful to kind of hear your perspective on looking back at things that you did well, maybe didn't, maybe you would change, and what mattered and what doesn't matter necessarily at the end of the day. So would love to kind of leave it on, like, since you've now gone through this process and you're at college, like, talk a little bit about what some of your, what have you enjoyed, what's been going on, and kind of what are the next steps for you?
I've honestly just kind of continued doing what I love to do in high school. I think that's like the biggest thing for me was when I was talking about what I was showcasing on my applications was I've done this for a really long time and I have a genuine interest in it. Well, I mean, you can say that, but like, you got to show it. And I've shown it by doing it in college. I was super involved in my school in high school. I'm super involved in college now. I was really involved in my student government my first year, met a ton of really, really cool people, got to meet the chancellor of Vanderbilt. So that was really that was such a crazy experience. And now I'm, going to be continuing to do that, my sophomore year and onwards. I'm spending the summer at Vandy doing research as well. So I'm continuing to do research at school. It's both just something I'm really interested in, and it's good for my resume. It's good for med school. I'm in the process of creating a keen branch in Nashville. So continuing my involvement in Keene, and also just continuing to volunteer. There's a ton of organizations at Vandy that are working to just improve science education in the Nashville and Tennessee area, and I've become pretty involved in that. And honestly, just kind of enjoying myself and learning more about myself too. I've been exploring my own, Indian culture identity. I joined an Indian folk dance team at Vandy. So I've been trying to make sure that I have a lot of like academic and, I don't know, like, I guess resume friendly extracurriculars, but I'm also trying to enjoy myself and making sure that I'm making a ton of really great connections and friends too.
That's awesome. I love it. That sounds great. Well, Soham, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. And it's been super interesting to hear your perspective, and I'm sure everybody's going to definitely value what the approach that you've taken and sort of your insights as well. So thanks again. Make sure everybody that you follow, like, and subscribe on all social media platforms, and check back next week for another episode. We have a lot of great students coming on, so look forward to learning more from them every week. Thanks again, Soham. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me. Love this.
Absolutely.